In this video, I'm going to be giving you top tips for being an awesome form tutor. This is brought to you by the teaching coach, which is me, and you can see my social media links there at the bottom if that's something that you're interested in. So, first of all, the role of a form tutor is something that is attached to your teaching post. It's often something that can be forgotten about, particularly if you're an NQT applying for a job. People don't necessarily think about the fact that a form tutor and the role of being a form tutor is attached to your teaching post in most schools. In fact, all schools I've worked in, I've been a form tutor before being a head of year. I've been a form tutor as part of my teaching post. So it's something that actually people often need to be just reminded about as being part of their teaching role. But it is incredibly important. It is something that's an incredibly important part of school. It's also an exceptionally fulfilling part of school as well, and part of your role as an educator. It's something that gives you the opportunity to inspire lots of students in a different way, completely different way to teaching. And on top of that, it is the pillar of schools. It's one of the things that make schools work in the way that they do, and being a form tutor is an exceptionally important part of schools running how they do, and I'll talk about that in a bit more in a second. So form tutors are incredibly powerful for several reasons, one of which is that they lead and motivate a large group of students. Sometimes in a form you might get upwards of 30 students to look after, and it's one form tutor leading and motivating that entire group of students. On top of that, form tutors are often the first point of contact for a student in distress. Particularly if you've got a good relationship with your form, you will find or tend to find that students will directly go to their form tutor to speak to them if they're upset, frustrated, angry, whatever. A form tutor is also exceptionally powerful because they understand their tutor group. I often liken a tutor to a coach and a form group to a team. And a coach understands their team and their weaknesses and their strengths. On top of that, form tutors are exceptionally powerful because they manage the whirlwind that can be form time at the beginning of the day. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but actually form tutors are powerful because they're able to control that potentially chaotic start and are the people that start the rest of the day for the school. They're also often the first point of contact for parents. Apart from maybe the receptionist that you might get to speak to as you come through the school system, they are the first people usually that will speak to a parent who's maybe frustrated or got a problem or an issue they need to raise, and that's a form tutor that will usually pick up that kind of phone call. In addition, they also act as a support mechanism for the entire pastoral network, and I spoke about this a little bit a second ago, but they are actually the pillar of the entire pastoral network. And if you think about it, heads of year can't do their jobs without form tutors being their team. PSHE days wouldn't be able to run, PSHE sessions usually wouldn't be able to run. I don't think it's often that a school will have a dedicated PSHE team. It's often taught by form tutors. On top of that, form tutors are the people that end up delivering something like a personal development day, and actually they're a support mechanism for the entire kind of pastoral network. Without form tutors, that pastoral network doesn't function properly. So my first top tip for being an effective or awesome form tutor is to get to know your form and their parents and carers. Knowing your form is probably the single most important thing that you could do. Largely because of the fact that it allows you to know who it is that you've got to watch, who it is that might slip through the net. You get the opportunity to actually focus on students that perhaps you're worried or concerned about. Knowing your form means you know which friendship groups work, which friendship groups don't. Hopefully your form tutor, or sorry, your head of year will have put your group together, your form group together in such a way that you'll have the opportunity to be able to get to know them and they'll work quite well as a group. But it is important for you to get to know your form inside out. You should know who your pupil premium students are, who your looked after students are, what their key stage 2 data looks like, what their targets are, any safeguarding issues you've got, any previous attendance, what the behaviour's like. Now, on top of knowing all that about your form, you should also know their parents and their carers. And this is a really important piece of information that was given to me when I first started as a form tutor. Someone once recommended that I made a phone call to all parents in my form within the first month of being a new form tutor. And that was to get to knowing parents and carers, knowing which parents you can ring and rely on, knowing which parents might be more difficult to get through to, knowing which parents you can deliver bad news to, knowing which parents you might need support from your head of year on. It's also really important for your parents to know who you are. I got to a point when I was first started being a form tutor that I was able to pick up the phone and parents knew my voice, and that was something that was really powerful because it felt as though we actually knew each other. I wasn't just ringing from school, but there was a personal kind of connection there as well. On top of that, it's also really important to get them to know each other, and that's not the parents, that's the students. Getting them to know each other is the beginning of kind of building a team, which I've hinted at already, and is the opportunity that you get to start them to work as individuals, as a group. My second tip is to communicate it with home, and this links nicely with my first tip. Communicating with home is something that's exceptionally important as a form tutor. It's far better that parents and carers hear information from yourselves as opposed to hearing it when students arrive home 3 hours later, particularly if it's something that's difficult to communicate. My sort of rule of thumb is if it's anything that is even of medium importance, I would be ringing home to tell parents about it. And there is an argument, obviously, you always got to consider your workload, but it is exceptionally important that you are communicating with home about everything. My top tip 3 is to teach them to be a team. And that is where really the skill of a form tutor comes into its own. It's important to celebrate them for individuals, but it's also really important that you are teaching them to support each other and to work as a group. You can do that by completing things like team building activities, using that first form time when you get back at the beginning of each year to get to know each other, maybe exploring what people have done over the summer. There's loads of fantastic team building exercises you can find on places like TES or just online to teach them to be a team. And I would encourage you to think about your basic expectations for them as a team. Some good things to think about are things like kindness and looking out for each other, supporting each other. It's very easy that someone vulnerable in your form would get alienated by their form members because you haven't properly integrated them into a team and looking after each other. My top tip 4 is to make sure that you are always waving their flag, even when it feels difficult. And it's something that even as a form tutor, I had to constantly remind myself about, which is that you are essentially, and I think I read this on the Teacher Toolkit website, you are essentially like their lawyer. You're the person that's there defending them, investigating things, challenging them, looking into things for them, and you are always there to be waving their flag. One of the things that I would recommend that you do or don't do is engage in negative conversations about your form with other members of staff. It's incredibly easy to get sucked into a negative conversation about someone in your form, and what will happen is that you'll start to kind of disconnect yourself from that member of your form, and therefore when something bad happens or something difficult happens with that member of your form, it becomes harder to defend them. Always try to see the good in everyone in your form, even if you feel at some days it's impossible to do so. My top tip 5 is to be organised. Now, I hinted a little bit about this at the beginning when I talked about the whirlwind that can be form time. If you haven't yet experienced form time, it can be chaotic. You're often asked to do a literacy task, a numeracy task, British values task, career tasks, alongside doing things like checking behaviour points or doing reports or handing out things about trips, perhaps about events during the day or clubs after school. You maybe have 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning of the day. Perhaps you'll have something in the afternoon, but a lot of schools have moved away from that now. You might have 10 to 15 minutes in the morning, maybe 20 if you're lucky. And in that time, you will have to get through an awful lot of information. So it is absolutely paramount that you make sure that you are organised for that session. Even if you're an experienced form tutor, it can be very easy to leave it in place of maybe planning for your lessons or marking. And then when you come to form time, things don't run as smoothly as they should, just simply because you haven't organised it. Make sure that you're turning up on time, that you're prepared, you've printed your resources, you've got your PowerPoint. If you can, organise yourself some routines in your form time. Get yourself someone who checks equipment in the morning. Get yourself someone who checks uniform. Get yourself someone who hands out things about trips. And when I say someone, what I mean is a student handing out those things for you. Because that 15 to 20 minutes, however long you've got, will fly by. And if students aren't prepared for the day, what it does is it creates havoc for the rest of teachers or heads of department or heads of year, and essentially students and parents everywhere else. My next top tip links to that really nicely. So top tip 6 is to get them ready for the day ahead. It is exceptionally important that you prioritise what you share with them in form time. Yes, it's very important that you get your literacy task done, your numeracy task done, your British values task. But if you haven't told them about something that's going to affect them at lunchtime, or you haven't told them about a change of classrooms, or you haven't told them about something that's going to affect maybe their PSHE lesson, actually you're kind of undercutting the purpose of form time. It is exceptionally important that you dedicate at least a few minutes of your form time in the morning to sharing those notices. That does not mean that that's what form time is about, because of course it's not, it's pastoral, but it is about setting them up for the day and getting them ready. I would always have, and obviously it's more difficult when we think about September 2020, but I've always made sure that you have a supply of pens and pencils ready, so you're setting them up to be great learners. Having that form time organised in the morning means that you're going to set them up to be calm. If they go to their first lesson calm, they're going to be much more organised in terms of their learning. They're going to make much better progress. It's important that that first 15 minutes is calm, organised, and something that potentially might energise them for the day. Don't forget as well that you might be the first smile that they've seen. It's always really important to remember that not all students come from necessarily happy homes. And that it's incredibly important that that smile they see as you come through the door, as they come through the door, that's a welcoming smile that they're going to want to see in the morning. My top tip 7 is to set your expectations high. You can always pull back on your expectations a little bit as you come through the year. Go in straight away and set your expectations high. Share your expectations with your form. Tell them exactly what you expect of them. Make sure, if you're going to set your expectations high, that you role model those expectations. If you're asking them to pick up litter yourself. If you're asking them to turn up on time yourself. But set your expectations really high and be unapologetic about it. Make sure that they know the expectations of them and they know that what they're aiming for. My top tip number 8 is to build relationships. And that's a really key, important thing. A student is only going to turn to you in a moment of crisis and distress if you've built a relationship with them. And it links to the idea of actually getting to know them. But more than getting to know them is building that time in each day in your form time and throughout your day to build relationships with them. Find out what they like about school. Find out what they like about outside of school. Find out what sort of things they like to do, perhaps at the weekends. Find out the sort of things, the home life that they've got, maybe the extracurricular clubs they take part in. Find out and build relationships with them. Share information about yourself, which is non-crucial. So never share, for example, your address or anything like that. Never share your address. But certainly you can sort of tell them key things about yourself, maybe about your hobbies, certain things that you do outside of school. Build those relationships with them so that they feel they can come and talk to you. In the moment of being a form tutor, you are not a teacher, you are a form tutor. And that means that you end up being almost, like I've said, a coach, but almost like a parental kind of contact in school for students. So that brings me to the end of the video and my 8 top tips for being an effective form tutor. To go back through those: build relationships, set your expectations high, get them ready for the day ahead, be organised, wave their flag even when it feels difficult, teach them to be a team, communicate with home, get to know your form and their parents and carers, get to know them, each other. And then also remind yourself that form tutors are incredibly powerful. Thanks very much for watching Top Tips for being an awesome form tutor, and follow me on social media if you haven't done so already.